From the preschool setting to the school setting, and our next speaker is Joe Donnelly, who I think, if I'm correct, did the first study to actually integrate physical activity as part of learning within the elementary school setting, where there were active games to teach math and other elementary school subjects. And he has extended that early research to become one of the leaders in the area of promoting physical activity within the school setting and incorporating that into learning outcomes. And so, Joe, welcome.
One of those folks that have to, if I have my glasses on, I can't see near. If I don't have them on, I can't see far. So I may put them on and off a little bit. Thank very much for the kind invitation to be here. Kind of like Chuck earlier, I got a throat thing going, so I may be going for the water here in a minute. Wrong way. The sides. Yeah, okay. So this is the overview of the presentation. I want to discuss the metabolic syndrome a little bit. We have some papers on that based on real samples in Kansas. Talk about some minimal intervention approaches, some barriers and potential solutions, and then summarize. In our first PAC study, physical activity across the curriculum, we were fortunate enough to be able to collect blood samples on a large proportion of the children. This was about 17, 18 different schools. Actually, I'm sorry, it was 22 schools. So we had a pretty large population. It's more and more difficult all the time to collect blood samples, which, to us is unfortunate, but that's the way the parents see it. That's the way the school districts see it. And we found metabolic syndrome. The top is the pointer, perhaps? Inside? I got it. Okay. At about 5% of the total sample, largely driven by blood pressure, which is probably not right. We were using cuffs, and the kids were probably a little freaked out. So I thought to myself, what if you cut it in half? So you went from 40 to 20, and what if you cut that in half again to really say, gee, this wasn't the best situation? You still may have 10%. And this has been replicated in our current study where we're using automatic cuffs and better procedures, about 5 to 6% with metabolic syndrome, which is not such a good deal. Our model is pretty simple, but it integrates physical activity and fitness and body fatness, things that people think may be associated with cognitive function and academic achievement. So physical activity and cardiovascular fitness, as Russ pointed out, don't always go hand in hand, but both can affect body fat. Body fat may or may not affect academic performance, but cardiovascular fitness seems to come up time and time again. Whoops. Yeah, it seems to come up time and time again to do something with cognitive function and with academic achievement in particular. Physical activity may not be as highly correlated. So our interventions bear this in mind. Usually they have cardiovascular fitness components. We hope to impact fatness as well as academic performance. As you've heard, schools are sedentary. This is actually modeled after my own kids. Back in my Nebraska days, I just lived 5 miles outside of town. A town of 22,000 people, so it's a fairly rural setting, and it was an hour on the bus each way. So it's a long period of time. The recess in physical education declined constantly in the 20 years that I was there. Of course, in the school systems, motor off-time task is discouraged / punished, and I'm not saying, you can't have kids jumping all over the place, and the traditional paradigm is sit down and be quiet. So really, as you go through school, you start off with kids that aren't in school, that run around like crazy, are very active, drive people nuts. They become 5 or 6, they get into kindergarten, and they're told basically be quiet and sit down for the next 12 years. In our opinion, physical education is not by itself adequate to provide the necessary level of physical activity to impact fitness, fatness, and academic achievement. This is not a negative on physical education teachers. I think they have a real tough situation. Everything has been diminished. In our neck of the woods, some of the classes are as little as 20 minutes in duration in elementary schools. The MET values or energy expenditures are very low. There are people that study how much activity goes on in physical education, and reports are as low as 3 minutes. Some are more like 10 or 11 minutes. But if you have a 20 or 30-minute period, none of them are 15, 20 minutes. So it's really a tough deal, inadequate facilities and equipment. And in our neck of the woods, again, depending on the school system, these teachers are traveling to multiple school systems or multiple schools within a system. So it's a pretty tough deal for them. So I don't remember exactly when we came up with this. I think, like all good ideas, I stole it. My wife is the dreaded English teacher in high school, and they have a lot of the across the curriculum stuff. Reading, spelling, math, language, and so forth. And at some point, we said, you know, this may be an opportunity to infuse short periods of physical activity into the regular school day. So the first study we did was, as you can see, a 3-year randomized controlled trial. And we started with children in grades 2 and 3. 2 is tough. 1 is really tough in terms of instruments and trying to get information and so forth. And we took the 2nd and 3rd graders to 3rd and 4th, and then 4th and 5th. The major aims of this were to increase the activity using regular classroom teachers to teach existing lessons. So this is in contrast, in my opinion, maybe not everyone's, to activity break philosophy. These are the existing classroom teachers with their existing curriculum. And I know you can argue for different paradigms, and that's fine. There are groups that try to match their intervention to state standards and things of that nature. We took the opposite approach, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel constantly as these things change. So in our second pack, which is ongoing now, we've already had a change in all the school standards in our school district in Kansas. We would have had to change the entire curriculum. The first study had a primary aim at BMI, and this was a tough sell. When we went in with a health attitude, you know, we want to provide health for the students, BMI, increased physical activity, and so forth. We really got nowhere. In the effort to recruit 17, I think we actually needed 14 schools. We have 4. And we quickly changed our intro to academic achievement and classroom behavior, and we ended up with 22 schools. So our experience was the schools recognize that health is an issue. They don't feel it their primary objective. And so it was a much tougher sell. So we sort of did an end run, if you will. The secondary aims were to determine the association between active lessons and academic achievement. Just like the entire study, I'm not sure when this popped into our heads, but thank God it did. And at the time, the idea we had was simply demonstrate that things don't get worse. In other words, you'll be thrown out of the school system if academic achievement deteriorates. So if you want to improve health, fine, make sure that academic achievement doesn't deteriorate. And as illustrated previously, we took blood samples to try to get a handle on things like metabolic syndrome. So this is a classroom-based approach, maintaining the focus on academics, and I think that's important in the cell. It's a way to get in to penetrate the school system. Penetrating the school system is becoming very difficult. No decrease in academic instruction time whatsoever. So if you had a math lesson, what we're really doing is training the academic teacher to teach that identical lesson through physical activity, not through a physical activity break or the lesson and here's a break, but you teach that lesson by making the kids move. So really what we're trying to do is a traditional classroom where people are sitting, okay, to a more active classroom. Lord knows what these kids are doing at the time, but you get the idea. So they're periodically throughout the day doing a physically active lesson. This is the conceptual framework we did, again, largely driven by my wife, that it must be a minimal intervention. It has to enhance or not diminish learning. No additional teacher prep time probably should be at the top of the pile. That's mandatory, as in you have to do something extra. The conversation is 5 seconds, okay? So you'll be, you just, at least in Kansas, that doesn't fly. No cost, you know, maybe you buy a ball, but it has to be extremely minimal / trivial. It'd be nice if it was perpetuated and replicated. Even those us in research, believe it or not, get tired of seeing the work end when the study ends. So it'd be nice if you could theorize or in fact see if it moved forward when you left the environment. And it probably isn't going to make it if it isn't fun. So you have to come up with something that at least is tolerable. Fun is better, but it has to at least be tolerable. And in PAC, since you're in the school, you must participate. So it's sort of an environmental approach as opposed to you can choose to participate in sports after school or not. Pretty much here you must participate. We felt 10 minutes was a good shot. We don't actually, that morphed immediately in terms of our interaction with the teachers, do a 2-minute lesson, a 20-minute lesson. So really 2 10-minute lessons ends up being 90 to 100 minutes a week that we targeted. And it's across anything that your imagination allows. PAC is a concept. It's really not a curriculum. If you get a with it teacher and they get the idea, end of story. The game is over. Okay? It's really just, can you turn this lesson that's sedentary into an active one? So I mentioned we had 22 schools, 3 years, grades 2 and 3, 90 to 100 minutes, and they deliver existing lessons. So I'm not that tech savvy, so I didn't try to put a clip, in. So we have these still pictures, again, the active lesson, Lord knows what they're doing. This one's pretty easy and illustrates it, learning to spell, hop on different letters and so forth. These things aren't very complicated. Learning math, they're doing the numbers. Sometimes they have kids go to different ends of the classroom. 3 kids go that way, 5 kids go that way. That's 3/5, stuff like that. So it's just up to your imagination. The Spanish thing was cool. I have no idea what they're doing. I mean, the Spanish teacher was the best, but I have no idea how she did this. It's pretty crazy. So just obligatory, did we get more activity than controls? Yeah. Okay, it's kind of duh, but anyway, yeah. So there's controls. This was using the soffit that we modified. You can't use soffit flat out because it's, lying, sitting, standing, and you get kids doing weird movements. So we modified that a bit. The energy expenditure of exercise we were interested in, theoretically, if it doesn't give you enough amount, you're probably going down the wrong path. So we were able to get 3.4 METs, which is the lower end. And in the new trial, we're trying to bump everything up into 5 and 6, and we're struggling. We're up a little bit, but not too much. So one of the things that we haven't been able to do real well is to seriously increase the vigor of the activity. We can get the kids up, they do all sorts of stuff, but to really get them up to 5, 6 METs, we don't get that often. So our primary objective in this study was BMI. The global analysis did not show an effect, so we did a sub-analysis, a secondary analysis, and what we found is that the the classrooms that delivered 75 plus minutes showed a differential effect. So that's not as good as a primary because these now self-selected teachers, self-selected kids, but it was encouraging to see if they got some of the dose that something good happened for our primary aim. What we became excited about was this slide. And so academic achievement was measured by a nationally validated test called the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test, or WIAT. It was done by a third-party, contracted, blinded to condition. And what we found was significant statistical results and clinically significant results. And this is, the way you read this is blue to blue and red to red. So this is baseline in year 3. baseline in year 3, reading, math, and spelling, okay? And what we found is with the PAC schools, blue, they tend to go up. And with the control schools, they don't do much, or they seem to even go down. So we ended up with quite a significant difference. But again, this was a secondary outcome. So because it was a secondary outcome, that's why we pursued the next PAC, which I'll hit on briefly. I think previously we just saw slides that say if the teachers are active, the kids are more active, and we found the same result. As we just had 1, 2, and 3, all right, as they were rated the same. The SOFIT people also rated the teachers, and we with a 1, 2, or a 3, and we found a relationship where if the teacher's active, the kids are more active, and it's pretty intuitive. Here's something that we thought was cool. We decided, this perpetuation thing, let's actually see what we have here. So without any contact, we came back 9 months later and surveyed teachers. They probably, to some extent, gave socially desirable answers nonetheless, okay? So we had over 90% using physically active lessons greater than 1 day a week. We have about 55% 2 to 4 days a week. We have 35% almost every day, and only 5% that didn't use. So we thought that was cool in that it was self-perpetuated. So that led us to say, gee, we're onto something maybe, and so the way to look into this is another trial. So we were fortunate enough to renew this, and we now have A+ PAC, which sort of reflects now the emphasis. What we really did is flip the aims. So the primary aims were biological in PAC 1, with a secondary outcome of academic achievement. Now academic achievement is primary, but we're still doing blood and pacer test and waist circumferences and so forth. We have 17 schools, 20 children from grades 2 and 3 followed for 3 years, and again, 20 minutes of A+ PAC lessons per day. So we again have the Wechsler individual achievement test, but we also have access to the state-administered achievement test with individual identifiers, which means although we have a cluster randomized trial primarily for analysis number 1, we also have individual identifiers, so we can do all sorts of secondary analysis on individuals. We didn't have that in the first one. Chuck is involved in this, and his group monitors the cognitive function tests, which he has already presented some of that stuff. And like I said, we're doing a bunch of, still doing a bunch of biological type tests. So we don't have too much data so far because it ends next May. Okay, so we're 2 years into it. We just started year 3. We did look at some baseline data, so this is just correlational data, and we're finding the same things that Chuck found. This is reading, math, and spelling, and what you find are positive relationships, whether they be linear or have a curve to them. And interesting, the biggest bang seems to be for your buck, in the lower categories, the lower fitness categories, almost kind of like some of the adult changes with diabetes risk factors and cardiovascular risk factors. You get the biggest bang moving people from the lowest category to just the next lowest category. So we're going to have to look into this a little bit because it's a bit interesting. So lastly, so we've done some studies, and what are our thoughts to date? How to increase physical activity in schools without decreasing academic instruction time. So these are some thoughts that we have. Increase time they are active in physical education and research, improve the quality, provide access to physical activity before and after school. Back in Nebraska where I was, just when I was leaving, we instituted a walking school bus. That's been going on now for about 10 years, pretty cool. Active transportation and physically active lessons, of course. What are some of the barriers that I mentioned before? The low teacher burden. We can't understand, there are some teachers that don't like this approach. It's probably about 15% of them. But as the burden goes up, you'll get more and more teachers that say, I can't do this. To us, it seems, what do you mean you can't do this? Take a sedentary lesson, make it physically active. Well, they have no background in physical activity, perhaps. So it is a bit of a burden, so you need to keep that down. Can't have motor skills in there in the classroom. This has to be simple stuff. It can't just be the athletes. What we need is this, the killer evidence to link physical activity to fitness and learning with plausible biological models followed up with more applied studies such as A+PAC to show that it actually translates to the classroom. And it has to be low cost, no cost, and sustainable. There are some programs out there if you're interested in this type of stuff, and this is not a complete list, but of course there are. There's the Take 10, been around for quite some time. Let's Move in School, the Energizers from, I think, East Carolina, and so forth. So if you say, gee, this is an idea I'd like to explore, there are places you can go to talk to people that have models that could help you put this in your classrooms. Thank you.